My phone buzzed at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. I was sitting in my office break room, halfway through a turkey sandwich, scrolling through Black Friday ads when the text came through. Mom's contact photo lit up the screen. That fake smile she always wore for family pictures, the one that never reached her eyes. "Don't show up for Thanksgiving this year, Jessica. You'll just ruin it for everyone like you always do. We're having a real family dinner for once." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stared at the message, read it twice, then 3 times. The words didn't change. My mother, Margaret Sullivan, had just uninvited me from Thanksgiving. Not just uninvited, she'd made it clear I was considered a problem, a disruption, something that would contaminate their perfect holiday gathering. I set my sandwich down. My hands weren't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was just processing. Because this wasn't completely out of nowhere, was it? This was the culmination of 28 years of being the family scapegoat, the daughter who could never quite measure up to the golden child image they'd built around my younger brother Ryan. But there was something different about this text. Something so casual, so dismissive, so final in its cruelty that it cut through all the fog of years of gaslighting and manipulation. She hadn't even bothered to call, hadn't tried to soften it, just typed out my rejection like she was canceling a subscription service. I typed back 2 words, "Sounds good." Then I did something I'd never done before in my entire relationship with my family. I blocked her number, and my father's, and Ryan's, and my Aunt Carol's, who I knew would be recruited as a flying monkey within the hour. But let me back up. Let me tell you about the Sullivan family dynamics, because this text didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the inevitable result of a toxic system that had been brewing for decades, with me cast as the perpetual outsider in my own family. Growing up in our suburban Cleveland home, I learned early that love in the Sullivan household was conditional. It was performance-based. And somehow, no matter how hard I tried, I was always performing the wrong role in their carefully scripted family drama. My mother, Margaret, was the queen of passive-aggressive warfare. She never screamed, never hit, never did anything that would look obviously abusive to outsiders. Instead, she specialized in the kind of subtle emotional terrorism that leaves no visible bruises but destroys you from the inside out. Her weapon of choice was comparison, delivered with a sweet smile and just enough plausible deniability to make you question your own reality. "Oh, Jessica, honey, did you see how beautiful Sandra Miller looked at church? She's really glowing since she lost all that weight. You should ask her for tips." This while I was struggling with an eating disorder she pretended not to notice. "Ryan got another promotion at work. Isn't that wonderful? He's always been so ambitious. Not everyone can be a go-getter, I suppose." This after I'd just told her about completing my master's degree while working full-time. The Hendersons' daughter just bought her parents a new car for their anniversary. Some children are just naturally more generous, I guess. This despite the fact that I'd been paying their phone bill and helping with groceries for 3 years. Dad, Michael Sullivan, was the silent enabler. He never participated in the emotional abuse directly, but he never stopped it either. His role was to play the peacekeeper, always telling me to just ignore your mother when she gets like this, or you know she doesn't mean it. He was Swiss in every family conflict, which meant he was effectively on her side by default. And then there was Ryan. Golden Boy Ryan, who could do no wrong in their eyes. He was 3 years younger than me, but had been treated like the crown, prince since birth. When Ryan got suspended from high school for drinking, it was, boys will be boys. When I came home 15 minutes past curfew, it was a lecture about responsibility and respect. When Ryan dropped out of college twice, it was, he's finding himself. When I graduated summa cum laude, the conversation at dinner was about Ryan's new girlfriend. The pattern was so consistent, so predictable, that I'd actually started documenting it in college, Not intentionally at first, just venting in my journal about the latest family drama. But over time, I began to see the systematic nature of it. How I was always the problem, always the one who needed to change, always the one responsible for everyone else's emotional well-being. Every family gathering was a minefield. I'd arrive hoping this time would be different, that maybe I could just enjoy a normal holiday with my family. Instead, I'd spend the entire time hyper-aware of every word, every expression, every potential trigger. Because inevitably, something would happen. Some comment, some comparison, some joke at my expense that would leave me feeling like I was 10 years old again, desperate for approval from people who seemed incapable of giving it. Last Thanksgiving was particularly brutal. I'd just gotten a promotion at the marketing firm where I worked, and I was excited to share the news. I thought maybe, finally, this would be something they could celebrate with me. Instead, Mom spent the entire dinner talking about Ryan's new apartment and how successful he was becoming, despite the fact that I was paying for his car insurance and his parents were still covering his rent. When I tried to mention my promotion, she cut me off mid-sentence to ask if I'd tried the stuffing, then immediately launched into a story about how the neighbor's daughter had just made partner at some law firm. The message was clear. Your achievements don't matter here, but it wasn't just the big moments. It was the 1,000 little cuts, the daily reminders that I was somehow less than, somehow not enough. Phone calls that started with criticism disguised as concern. Text messages that were really just opportunities to highlight my failures. Family photos where I was always positioned on the edge, easily cropped out. I'd tried everything over the years. I'd tried being the perfect daughter, anticipating their needs, making myself indispensable. I'd tried being successful, thinking achievements would finally earn their respect. I'd tried being confrontational, calling out the behavior directly. I'd tried being distant, hoping they'd miss me enough to change. Nothing worked, because the truth was, they needed a scapegoat. Every dysfunctional family system requires someone to blame, someone to carry the shadow of all their unresolved issues and dysfunction. I was convenient for that role, sensitive enough to absorb the damage, loyal enough to keep coming back, and isolated enough that no one would question the narrative they'd built around me. The text about Thanksgiving wasn't really about Thanksgiving at all. It was about power. It was about making sure I knew my place in their hierarchy. It was about delivering a final, devastating blow to whatever hope I still carried that things might change, that they might finally see me as worthy of basic human decency. But here's what Margaret Sullivan didn't anticipate. Sometimes the final blow is the one that finally sets you free. As I sat in that break room, staring at those cruel words on my phone screen, something shifted inside me. Not anger. Exactly. Not even hurt, though that was there too. It was more like clarity. Crystal clear, undeniable clarity about what I was dealing with and what I needed to do about it. This wasn't a family that was going to change. This wasn't a mother who was going to suddenly develop empathy or emotional intelligence. This wasn't a situation that was going to improve with more patience, more understanding, more of my endless capacity for forgiveness. This was a toxic system that required my participation to function. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to stop participating. So when I typed "sounds good" and hit send, it wasn't surrender. It was the beginning of the most important battle I'd ever fought. The battle for my right to exist without their permission, to thrive without their approval, and to build a life so full of genuine love and respect that their rejection would finally lose its power to destroy me. I finished my sandwich, went back to my desk, and started planning the first Thanksgiving of my real life. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The thing about finally reaching your breaking point is that it doesn't always feel like breaking. Sometimes it feels like the opposite, like everything suddenly clicking into place with startling clarity. I walked back to my desk after lunch and opened my laptop like it was any other Tuesday afternoon. My coworker Linda noticed I seemed different, calmer somehow, and asked if everything was okay. I told her everything was perfect, and for the first time in years, I meant it. But while my exterior remained steady, my mind was working with laser focus. I wasn't planning revenge, I was planning freedom, and freedom, I was learning, required strategy. I opened a new document on my computer and titled it Operation Thanksgiving. Then I started making lists. Not angry, emotional lists scribbled in fury, but methodical, practical inventories of my life that I should have made years ago. First, Listbaus, financial entanglements, Ryan's car insurance, $127 month. I'd been paying for 2 years. Parents' streaming services, Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, Spotify Family Plan, Mom's gym membership that she forgot to take over after her temporary financial troubles, Dad's prescription copays that somehow became my responsibility, various loans that were never expected to be repaid. Second list, emotional. Labor, birthday, and anniversary reminders. I was the family calendar. Gift shopping and coordination for extended family. Holiday planning and execution. Mediating between family members during conflicts. Being the default emergency contact for everything. Third list. Access points. Spare keys to their house for emergencies. Passwords to shared accounts. My contact information as primary on various services, insurance beneficiary designations, joint accounts opened temporarily years ago. As I typed, I realized I had unconsciously built an entire infrastructure designed to keep the Sullivan family functioning. I was the invisible engine that kept their world running smoothly, and like most engines, I was taken for granted until I threatened to stop working. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd just told me I would ruin their Thanksgiving, when in reality, I had been the one making their celebrations possible for years. Who did they think coordinated the menu with Aunt Carol? Who made sure Dad's dietary restrictions were accommodated? Who drove 3 hours each way because they couldn't possibly host anywhere else? But this wasn't about proving my worth anymore. This was about recognizing it myself. I started with the small things, opened my banking app, and removed the automatic payments for Ryan's car insurance. The notification asked if I was sure. Yes, I was sure. More sure than I'd been about anything in months. Next, I logged into the family streaming accounts, changed all the passwords, removed their devices from my Spotify family plan, canceled the gym membership that Margaret had never actually used but insisted on keeping just in case. Each click felt like removing a tiny weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Delete, remove, cancel, unsubscribe. Words that had always felt harsh before now felt like liberation. My phone started buzzing around 4 p.m. First, a text from Dad. Jess, your mom says you won't be coming for Thanksgiving. Can we talk about this? I stared at the message for a long moment. Michael Sullivan, the man who had spent my entire childhood telling me to just ignore Mom's behavior, suddenly wanted to talk now that their comfort was threatened. Where was this desire for communication when I was crying in my childhood bedroom? Where was this concern when I was being systematically excluded from family conversations? I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my contacts and started a new group. Sullivan Family. Added Mom, Dad, Ryan, and Aunt Carol. Then I composed a single message. I've received the message about Thanksgiving and I completely understand. I'll be making other arrangements and won't be in touch for the foreseeable future. Please respect my decision. I hit send and immediately left the group chat. Within minutes, my phone was exploding. Individual texts from each of them, voicemails that I didn't listen to, missed calls that I didn't answer. The desperation was almost immediate, which told me everything I needed to know about their priorities. They weren't concerned about losing me. They were panicking about losing their support system. Ryan's text was particularly revealing. "What's wrong with you? Mom's really upset. Just apologize and come to dinner." Apologize. For what, exactly? For having feelings about being told I would ruin their holiday? For not quietly accepting my role as the family punching bag? The audacity was breathtaking, but not surprising. I turned my phone to silent and continued working. But the work wasn't just digital anymore. I was mentally restructuring my entire approach to family relationships, and it was exhausting in the best possible way. I thought about all the Thanksgivings I'd attended where I felt like a guest who wasn't really welcome. Sitting at the kids' table until I was 25 because there wasn't room at the main table, even though Ryan had been given a seat there since he was 16, bringing dishes that were barely acknowledged while everyone raved about the store-bought dessert someone else contributed. Being asked to clean up while others relaxed, then being told I was too sensitive when I mentioned feeling like the hired help. I thought about last Christmas, when Mom gave Ryan an expensive watch and handed me a gift card to Target with a sticky note that said, "Thought you could use this for practical things." When I opened it in front of everyone, she laughed and said, "Jessica's always been more practical than fashionable." I thought about my graduation from graduate school, where I earned my MBA while working full-time. The ceremony was on a Saturday afternoon, and I'd asked if they could come. Mom said they'd already committed to attending Ryan's friend's barbecue. "You understand, sweetheart. These social connections are important for Ryan's career." Every memory was a data point in a pattern I'd been too close to see clearly. I wasn't the problem in this family. I was the solution to problems they refused to acknowledge. I was the scapegoat for their dysfunction, the repository for their shame, the convenient target for their unresolved issues. But scapegoats only work if they stay in the designated role. And I was done playing my part. By 6 p.m., I had systematically dismantled most of my financial connections to their lives. It wasn't vindictive. It was practical. If I was going to be excluded from their family, then I needed to exclude myself from their expenses too. The beauty of doing this calmly, methodically, was that every action felt justified and necessary rather than reactive. I wasn't lashing out. I was cleaning house. I wasn't punishing them. I was protecting myself. I made one more list before leaving work. New Thanksgiving plans. Research local volunteer opportunities for the holiday. Look into Friendsgiving options. With Actual Friends plan a solo celebration focused on gratitude for my real-life book, a weekend getaway to somewhere I've always wanted to visit. For the first time in years, I was excited about Thanksgiving. Not because I was going to prove anything to anyone, but because I was finally going to celebrate it authentically, surrounded by people who actually wanted me there, even if that person was just me. As I packed up my laptop, I realized something profound had shifted in my relationship with myself. I wasn't the daughter desperately seeking approval anymore. I wasn't the sister trying to compete for scraps of attention. I wasn't the family member walking on eggshells to maintain peace. I was Jessica Sullivan, a successful professional with her own life, her own priorities, and her own standards for how she deserved to be treated. And those standards no longer included accepting cruelty disguised as family tradition. My phone was still buzzing with their increasingly frantic messages, but the sound no longer triggered anxiety in my chest. Instead, it sounded like background noise from a life I was finally ready to leave behind. The calm wasn't the absence of feeling, it was the presence of certainty, and that certainty was going to carry me through whatever came next. That evening, I sat in my apartment with takeout Thai food and started going through old files I'd kept stored in a box under my bed. Documents I'd saved over the years without really understanding why. Receipts, bank statements, emails, text screenshots. What I discovered was a paper trail that told a story I'd never fully seen before. The first folder contained what I called the Emergency Fund Chronicles. Starting in 2019, when I was 24 and had just landed my first real job, There was a pattern of financial emergencies that somehow always became my responsibility. March 2019. Honey, the car needs new brakes and we're a little short this month. Could you help us out? We'll pay you back next paycheck. $800 transferred from my savings. June 2019. The air conditioning unit died and it's going to be 90 degrees this week. Dad's blood pressure can't handle the heat. Wanted $200 for a new HVAC unit. September 2019. Ryan's laptop crashed right before his final exams. You know how important his education is. $900 for a MacBook Pro that Ryan wanted, not needed. December 2019. Christmas is going to be so disappointing for the family if we can't afford proper gifts. You wouldn't want to ruin everyone's holiday, would you? $1,500 for presents that I wasn't even thanked for. The phrase, "you'll pay you back," appeared in 17 different messages over 4 years. The actual repayments? 0. But it wasn't. Just the big-ticket items. There were monthly patterns I'd normalized without recognizing their significance. Mom's cell phone bill that got added to my family plan temporarily in 2020 was still being paid by me in 2023. Dad's subscription to a medical alert service that I'd agreed to cover just until his insurance figured things out. 3 years and counting. The most revealing discovery was a folder labeled medical bills. I'd completely forgotten that I'd become their secondary insurance coverage for anything their primary didn't cover. Dental work, vision appointments, prescription medications that weren't fully covered. Over 4 years, I'd paid over $8,000 in medical expenses for 2 people who had their own health insurance. But the paper trail revealed something even more insidious than financial exploitation. I found a collection of text message screenshots I'd saved during particularly harsh emotional episodes, and reading them chronologically painted a picture of systematic psychological manipulation that was breathtaking in its consistency. The messages fell into distinct categories. The guilt bombs. We sacrificed everything to raise you and your brother. The least you could do is show some gratitude. Family is supposed to stick together. I don't know where we went wrong with you. Your father and I are getting older. We won't be around forever, and then you'll regret treating us this way. The comparison attacks. Sarah Martinez just bought her parents a beautiful anniversary gift. Some daughters really know how to show love. I saw Rebecca's mom at the store today. She was bragging about how successful and generous Rebecca is. Made me think of you. Ryan never makes us feel guilty for asking for help. He understands what family means. The invalidation specialists. You're being too sensitive. We're just trying to help you grow. That's not how it happened. You're remembering it wrong. You always overreact to everything. Maybe you should talk to someone about that. The false scarcity creates. We didn't want to tell you, but we might lose the house if we can't catch up on payments. Dad's medication costs have gone up again. I don't know how we'll manage. The car is making that noise again. I'm scared to drive it. But we can't afford repairs. Reading these messages in sequence was like watching a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Every request was framed as a crisis. Every refusal was met with guilt and shame. Every boundary I tried to set was labeled as selfish or cruel. But perhaps the most damaging pattern was what I started calling the rewrite history game. I found emails where I'd carefully documented conflicts and their resolutions, only to have the same issues resurface months later with completely different narratives. For example, in January 2022, there was a major blow-up because I'd asked them to stop making jokes about my weight during family dinners. The resolution involved Mom apologizing and promising to be more mindful. But by March 2022, according to her version of events, I had attacked her out of nowhere, and she didn't understand why I was so angry about harmless teasing. I had saved the original apology email. She had apparently forgotten it existed. This pattern repeated itself dozens of times. apologies that were later denied, promises that were conveniently forgotten, agreements that were rewritten to cast me as the unreasonable one. They had been gaslighting me so consistently that I'd started documenting interactions just to maintain my grip on reality. The most heartbreaking folder was labeled Achievements Ignored. I'd kept programs from graduations they didn't attend, screenshots of job promotions they didn't acknowledge, photos from events they couldn't be bothered to ask about. The contrast was stark when compared to the Ryan's Accomplishments folder I found on Mom's Facebook page, which documented every minor milestone in his life like he was curing cancer. When I graduated summa cum laude with my bachelor's degree, I got a text that said, "Congrats, honey," with a thumbs up emoji. When Ryan passed his driver's test on the second try, Mom posted a 3-paragraph Facebook tribute about how proud she was of his determination and growth. But the most revealing document in the entire collection was something I'd forgotten. I'd written. A letter to myself from 2021, during a particularly dark period when I was questioning my own perceptions and wondering if I really was the problem child they painted me to be. The letter read, "I keep thinking I'm going crazy. They make me feel like I'm remembering things wrong, like I'm too sensitive, like I'm the one causing all the problems. But I'm not crazy. I know what happened. I know what they said. I know how they made me feel. I'm writing this down so that future me will remember. You're not the problem. You never were the problem. The problem is that they need someone to blame, and you've been convenient." Reading my own words from 2 years earlier was like receiving a message from a wiser version of myself. I had known even then what was happening. I had seen the patterns, recognized the manipulation, understood the dynamics. I just hadn't been ready to act on that knowledge. But now, sitting surrounded by years of documented evidence, the full scope of their systematic abuse was undeniable. This wasn't a family going through a rough patch. This wasn't a case of misunderstandings or communication issues. This was a carefully maintained system of exploitation that required my cooperation to function. I thought about the countless hours I'd spent in therapy wondering what was wrong with me, why I couldn't just get along with my family. I'd blamed myself for being too sensitive, too needy, too difficult. I'd internalized their narrative that I was the problem, the one who couldn't fit in, the daughter who just didn't understand how families were supposed to work, but families weren't supposed to work like this. Love wasn't supposed to feel like walking through a minefield. Support wasn't supposed to come with a price tag of emotional submission. Belonging wasn't supposed to require the complete abandonment of your own needs and boundaries. The Sullivan family system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. It was designed to extract maximum resources, financial, emotional, and psychological, from the designated giver while providing minimal recognition or reciprocity. It was designed to maintain the hierarchy that kept Mom in control, Dad in denial, and Ryan in the favored position, while keeping me in the role of family servant and emotional dumping ground. And it had worked beautifully for years, because I'd played my assigned role without question. I'd been the perfect scapegoat, intelligent enough to solve their problems, empathetic enough to absorb their dysfunction, loyal enough to keep coming back, and isolated enough that no one would question their treatment of me. But scapegoats serve a function only as long as they stay in position. And after reviewing 4 years of documented evidence, I finally understood that staying in position wasn't family loyalty. It was self-betrayal. The most powerful realization was that I had been complicit in my own mistreatment. Not because I deserved it or caused it, but because I had continued to participate in a system that was fundamentally designed to harm me. I had enabled their dysfunction by absorbing it, funded their irresponsibility by covering for it, and validated their narrative by accepting my assigned role as the family problem. But understanding complicity also meant understanding choice. If I had been choosing to participate, that meant I could also choose to stop. As I packed away the files that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete clarity about my family's true nature, coupled with complete certainty about what I needed to do next. The evidence was overwhelming. The pattern was undeniable, and my decision was final. Wednesday morning arrived with 17 missed calls and 43 unread text messages. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and began what I now think of as the Great Disconnection. But this wasn't going to be an emotional rampage. This was going to be surgical. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet titled Sullivan Family Extraction Plan. If they wanted to treat our relationship like a business transaction, then I was going to handle the dissolution like a business. Professional. Column A, service account. Column B, monthly cost. Column C, total paid over time. Column D, cancellation method. Column E, effective date. Column F, estimated impact. Row by row, I documented every single connection between their lives and my resources. The scope was staggering. I hadn't just been their daughter, I'd been their personal financial services department, their IT support, their insurance broker, their emergency fund, and their emotional customer service representative, all rolled into one. The streaming. Services alone were costing me $87 per month. Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, and something called Crunchyroll that Ryan had added for anime. None of these were in my name officially, but they were all billed to my credit card with family sharing settings that had somehow become permanent. I started with the easy cancellations, logged into each platform, removed their devices, changed the passwords, and downgraded to individual plans. Each confirmation email felt like removing another chain. The phone situation was more complex. I'd added them to my family plan in 2020 when Mom claimed their phone bills were getting out of control. What was supposed to be a 6-month arrangement had become a 3-year subsidy. Looking at the usage data was illuminating. Dad used maybe 1 GB of data per month, but Mom was streaming videos constantly, often hitting our plan's upper limits. I called Verizon and spoke to a customer service representative named Marcus, who was incredibly helpful once I explained the situation. "You want to split them off to their own plan?" he asked. "Exactly. They're adults who can manage their own phone service. I can set up individual accounts for them, effective immediately. They'll need to come in with ID to set up payment methods, but their numbers and phones will work exactly the same." Perfect. And Marcus? If they call claiming there's been some mistake, this change was intentional and authorized by the account holder, me. He laughed. "Got it. I'll put a note in the file." The medical bills required more delicate handling. I'd been listed as a secondary contact and backup payment method on their insurance accounts for years. Removing myself meant calling 3 different providers and navigating phone trees designed by sadists. At the dental office, the receptionist seemed confused. "But Mrs. Sullivan said you'd be handling any balance not covered by insurance." Mrs. Sullivan was mistaken. "Please remove my information from their account entirely and send all bills directly to the patient." "But what if they can't pay? Then you'll need to work out a payment plan with them, just like you would with any other patient." The car insurance was trickier. I'd co-signed on Ryan's policy when he was 19 and considered a high-risk driver. Now, at 25, he could certainly qualify for his own coverage, but extricating myself meant he'd probably see a significant rate increase. I called the insurance company and explained that I needed to be removed from the policy. The agent, Jennifer, was professional but cautious. "As the primary account holder, you have the right to make changes, but I should let you know that removing yourself will likely result in policy cancellation since the secondary driver doesn't meet our account requirements." What would Ryan need to do to get his own policy? He'd need to apply independently, provide proof of income, and probably pay a higher rate since he'd be starting fresh without the multi-policy discounts. When would this take effect? "We can process it immediately. but there's a 10-day grace period before coverage actually ends. Perfect. Please send all notifications to my email and make sure Ryan receives written notice about the change. The banking connections were the most complex. Over the years, I'd co-signed on various accounts, been added as an authorized user on their credit cards, and somehow become the primary contact for overdraft notifications on Dad's checking account. Spent 2 hours on the phone with 3 different banks, removing my name from accounts, revoking authorizations, and updating contact information. The most revealing conversation was with Citizens Bank, where I discovered I'd been covering Dad's overdraft fees automatically for 18 months. Your account has been set up to cover any overdrafts on the linked checking account, the representative explained. How much has this cost me? Let me check. It looks like $2,340 in covered overdrafts since January 2022. I nearly dropped the phone. $2,400 in overdraft coverage that I hadn't even known about. Dad had been spending money he didn't have, and my account had been silently covering the shortfall for a year and a half. Please remove that arrangement immediately, and send me documentation of all the transactions. Of course. And sir, you might want to notify the other account holder that this safety net is being removed. That's their responsibility now. But the most satisfying disconnection was the emergency contact situation. I'd been listed as the primary emergency contact for both parents at their doctor's offices, Dad's workplace, Mom's gym, their insurance, companies, and even their apartment complex. Each phone call followed a similar pattern. I need to remove myself as an emergency contact for Michael and Margaret Sullivan. Are you sure? We'll need an alternative contact. They have a son, Ryan Sullivan. Use him, or ask them to provide someone else. But what if we can't reach anyone in an emergency? That's not my problem to solve anymore. The hardest part wasn't the logistics. It was resisting the urge to create soft landings for them. My instinct, after years of being their problem solver, was to ease the transition. To give them warning, to help them set up new arrangements, to make sure they wouldn't be inconvenienced. But inconvenience was the point. They needed to experience the natural consequences of having treated me like an unpaid employee rather than a daughter. They needed to understand what it actually cost to maintain their lifestyle when that cost wasn't being subsidized by someone they felt entitled to exploit. I created a timeline for myself. Wednesday. Cancel all entertainment subscriptions and change passwords. Thursday. Remove myself from phone plan and insurance policies. Friday. Disconnect from all bank account arrangements and emergency contacts. Weekend. Change locks on my apartment and update my own emergency contacts, but I wasn't just disconnecting from their systems. I was also building new ones for myself. For the first time in years, I was designing a life that prioritized my own needs and goals. I opened a new savings account at a different bank and set up automatic transfers. The money that had been flowing to their various emergencies would now be building my emergency fund. I calculated that I'd been spending approximately $890 per month on Sullivan family expenses. That was $10,680 per year that I could now invest in my own future. I also created what I called my support network audit. If I was removing myself as their emergency contact, I needed to make sure I had genuine emergency contacts of my own. The exercise was sobering. I realized I'd been so focused on managing their crises that I'd neglected my own relationships. I reached out to my college friend Maria, who lived 2 hours away but had always been supportive. I called my coworker David, who'd been trying to include me in social events that I'd repeatedly declined because of family obligations. I even contacted my old therapist, Dr. Patricia Chen, to schedule an appointment. "Jessica, it's been over a year since we last spoke," Dr. Chen said when I called. "What's prompting you to reach out now?" "I'm finally doing what we talked about in our sessions. I'm setting boundaries with my family, and I think I'm going to need support processing. What comes next?" "I'm proud of you for taking this step. It sounds like you've found your courage." I think I've found my clarity, which might be even more important. By Friday evening, I had systematically removed myself from every aspect of their financial and logistical infrastructure. It was like performing surgery on a network that had taken years to build, carefully severing each connection without damaging my own systems. The most telling aspect of the entire process was how easy it actually was. Despite years of being told how much they needed me, how family is supposed to stick together, and how selfish it would be to prioritize my own life, the practical reality was straightforward. Every service could be transferred. Every account could be separated. Every emergency contact could be updated. The only thing that couldn't be easily replaced was my willingness to subsidize their lifestyle and absorb their dysfunction. And as I sat in my newly secured apartment that Friday night, surrounded by confirmation emails and cancellation notices, I realized something profound. I hadn't been indispensable to their lives. I had been convenient. And convenience, unlike love, can always be replaced. It just costs more and requires actual effort. The Sullivan family was about to discover what their lifestyle actually cost when they had to pay for it themselves. And I was about to discover what my life could look like when I stopped paying for theirs. Monday morning brought the storm I'd been expecting. My phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. with a call from an unknown number. Then another. Then 5 more in rapid succession. I let them all go to voicemail while I got ready for work, but the messages painted a clear picture of panic. Jessica, this is your father. Your mother is beside herself. The Netflix isn't working, the phones got cut off, and apparently the car insurance was canceled. Call me back immediately. This has gone too far. The next message was from Ryan, and his tone was different than I'd ever heard before. Actual distress instead of his usual entitled irritation. Jess, I don't know what's going on, but my phone got disconnected and my car insurance company says my policy was terminated. I have a date tonight and I can't even get an Uber without my phone working. Mom says you did this. Just call me back, okay? We can figure this out. But it was the third voicemail that revealed their true strategy. Mom's voice, quavering with what sounded like genuine tears. Honey, I think there's been some kind of mistake. Someone has hacked into our accounts and canceled everything. The phone company says you authorized it, but I know you would never do something so cruel to your own family. We need to go to the police about this identity theft. Please, call me back so we can sort this out together. Identity theft. Of course, rather than accepting responsibility for the consequences of their treatment, they were going to paint me as a criminal who had somehow stolen my own money back. I forwarded all the voicemails to my personal email account, then saved copies to a secure folder on my laptop. If they wanted to involve authorities, I was going to be prepared. At work, I was focused and productive in a way I hadn't been for months. Without the constant background anxiety of managing their various crises, my mind felt clearer than it had in years. I actually finished a project that had been stalled for weeks because I kept getting interrupted by their emergencies. Around 10 a.m., my work phone rang. The receptionist, Kelly, sounded confused. Jessica, there's a woman here who says she's your mother. She's pretty upset and demanding to see you. She says it's a family emergency. I took a deep breath. Margaret Sullivan had driven 45 minutes to my workplace, in the middle of a Tuesday morning, to confront me publicly. This was escalation tactics 101. If private pressure doesn't work, create a public scene to force compliance. Kelly, please tell her that I'm unavailable and ask her to leave. If she refuses, let me know and I'll call security. Are you sure? She seems really distressed. I'm absolutely sure. This is not a real emergency. 5 minutes later, Kelly called back. She's demanding that I give you a message. She says to tell you that families don't abandon each other and that she'll be waiting in the parking lot until you agree to talk to her. I looked out my office window and could see Mom's old Honda Civic parked directly in front of the building entrance. She was sitting in the driver's seat, clearly visible to anyone entering or leaving the building. The message was obvious. She was going to make this as public and uncomfortable as possible until I caved. But I'd been preparing for this exact scenario since Wednesday. I called building security and explained that I had a family member who was harassing me at work and refused to leave the property. Security escorted her off the premises within 10 minutes. That afternoon, the real escalation began. I got a call on my work line from Detective Sarah Martinez with the Cleveland Police Department. Ms. Sullivan, I'm calling regarding a report filed by Margaret Sullivan claiming fraudulent activity on several accounts. She's alleging that someone gained unauthorized access to family financial accounts and caused significant disruption to essential services. Do you have a few minutes to discuss this matter? My heart rate spiked, but my voice remained steady. Detective Martinez, I appreciate you calling. I assume this is about the accounts that were in my name that I canceled last week? You canceled accounts that were in your name? That's correct. Every single account, service, and subscription that was canceled was either in my name, paid for with my credit cards, or set up under my authorization. I have documentation for all of it. There was a pause. Can you provide that documentation? Absolutely. When would be convenient for you? We arranged to meet at the police station the next evening. I spent that night organizing my evidence into a presentation that would have impressed my most demanding college professor. Bank statements, insurance documents, account authorization forms, email confirmations of cancellations, and screenshots of every relevant transaction. But I also prepared for their counter-narrative. I printed out the text message thread that started this whole situation, including Mom's original "Don't show up for Thanksgiving" message. I gathered character references from my employer, my landlord, and Dr. Chen. I even pulled my credit report to demonstrate my financial stability and responsibility. The meeting with Detective Martinez was scheduled for 6 p.m. Wednesday evening. I arrived 15 minutes early with an organized binder of evidence. When I was called into the interview room, I discovered I wasn't alone. Mom and Dad were sitting across the table, both looking smaller and older than I remembered. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, but her expression was defiant. Dad looked uncomfortable, like he wished he was anywhere else, which was probably true. Detective Martinez was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed my documentation carefully while my parents sat in tense silence. Ms. Sullivan, she said finally, everything you've shown me confirms that you were the legal account holder for these services. You had every right to cancel them. Mom jumped in immediately. But she did it to hurt us. She cut off our phones, our insurance, everything, without any warning. What kind of daughter does that to her own parents? Detective Martinez looked at her calmly. What kind of parents uninvite their daughter from Thanksgiving and tell her she'll ruin the holiday for everyone? The room went dead silent. Mom's mouth opened and closed without sound. I've seen the text message, the detective continued. And I've seen 4 years of financial records showing that Ms. Sullivan has been supporting your household to the tune of nearly $11,000 per year. This isn't fraud. This is a family dispute. Dad finally spoke up. We didn't realize. We thought it was just temporary help. For 4 years? Detective Martinez's tone was skeptical. I opened my mouth to respond, but she held up a hand. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, your daughter has committed no crime. She's actually been remarkably generous, and frankly, she showed considerable restraint in how she handled the separation. Many people would have been far less organized about it. Mom's face was cycling through emotions: anger, disbelief, desperation. But she's destroying our family. Ma'am, from what I can see, your family was already in trouble. Your daughter just stopped enabling the dysfunction. The detective turned to me. Ms. Sullivan, do you want to press charges for filing a false police report? I looked at my parents, really looked at them. Dad was staring at his hands, probably realizing for the first time how much money I'd actually been contributing to their lives. Mom was still glaring at me, but there was something else in her expression now. Fear. For the first time in my life, Margaret Sullivan was afraid of me instead of the other way around. "No," I said quietly. "I don't want to press charges, but I want it on record that this contact was unwelcome and that any future harassment will result in a restraining order." Detective Martinez nodded. "Understood. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, I strongly advise you to respect your daughter's boundaries going forward. This department takes harassment seriously, especially when it involves workplace disruption and false reports." As we left the police station, Mom made one last attempt at manipulation. She followed me to my car, tears streaming down her face. "Jessica, please. We're family. We can work this out. I'm sorry about the text message. I was just stressed about the holiday preparations, and I said something I didn't mean." I unlocked my car and turned to face her. "Mom, you didn't just send a mean text. You've been treating me like an ATM and an emotional punching bag for years. This isn't about one message. This is about a pattern of behavior that I'm no longer willing to accept. But we love you." "No," I said, getting into my car. "You love what I provide. There's a difference." As I drove away, I could see her in my rearview mirror, standing alone in the police station parking lot. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the text message, the years of financial exploitation, the systematic emotional abuse, the attempt to criminalize my decision to protect myself. That night, I called Dr. Chen to debrief about the police station encounter. "How do you feel about how it went?" she asked. "Vindicated," I said without hesitation. For years, they made me feel like I was the problem, like I was too sensitive, or selfish, or ungrateful. But when an objective third party looked at the evidence, it was immediately clear who was actually behaving inappropriately. That must feel incredibly validating. It does. But it's also sad. They could have just accepted my boundaries and worked on rebuilding a healthier relationship. Instead, they chose to escalate and make themselves look worse. Some people would rather be right than be in relationship, Dr. Chen observed. "It sounds like your parents chose being right about their version of reality over being in relationship with you." As I hung up the phone, I realized that Detective Martinez had given me something more valuable than legal protection. She'd given me external validation that my perceptions were accurate, my actions were justified, and my boundaries were reasonable. For the first time in my adult life, I had an authority figure, someone with no stake in our family dynamics, confirm that I wasn't the problem in this situation. I wasn't too sensitive, too selfish, or too harsh. I was just finally standing up for myself. And that apparently was exactly what they couldn't handle. The aftermath of the police station confrontation brought an unexpected silence. For 3 days, my phone didn't ring with their crisis calls. No emergency texts about broken appliances or unpaid bills. No guilt-laden voicemails about how I was destroying the family. It was the first time in years I'd experienced complete radio silence from the Sullivan household. But Margaret Sullivan wasn't the type to retreat quietly. She was regrouping, and I should have anticipated her next move. Friday evening, my college. Friend Maria called, her voice tight with concern. "Jess, I don't know if you've seen Facebook today, but your mom posted something it's getting a lot of attention." I hadn't been on social media much lately. Part of my newfound mental clarity involved spending less time scrolling through other people's curated lives. But Maria's tone suggested this was something I needed to see. I logged into Facebook and immediately saw it. A post from Mom with over 40 comments and counting, accompanied by a photo of her looking devastated in what appeared to be a church parking lot. "My heart is broken today. After 28 years of loving and supporting my daughter, she has chosen to cut all contact with our family. No explanation, no conversation, just cruel silence. She canceled our phone service, our insurance, and left us unable to reach her in emergencies. I don't understand how a child I raised with so much love could become so cold." Please pray for our family during this difficult time. Sometimes the children you sacrifice everything for are the ones who hurt you the most. Heartbroken mom. Family struggles. Prayers needed. The comments were exactly what you'd expect from people who only knew mom's version of reality. I'm so sorry, Margaret. You don't deserve this treatment. Some kids just don't appreciate what their parents do for them. She'll regret this when you're gone. Stay strong. What kind of person abandons their family like this? But there were also comments that surprised me, people I barely remembered from high school, family friends I hadn't spoken to in years, even some of Mom's own relatives pushing back on her narrative. Margaret, maybe there's more to this story than you're sharing. I remember Jessica always being so responsible and caring. This seems very out of character. What happened before she cut contact? This didn't come from nowhere. The post had been shared 12 times, meaning the drama was spreading beyond Mom's immediate circle. I screenshot everything before it could be deleted or edited, then closed the app. I needed to think about how to respond, if at all. But the decision was made for me when my work phone rang Monday morning. It was my boss, Linda Chen, no relation to my therapist, Dr. Chen, despite the shared surname. Jessica, I got a call this morning from someone claiming to be your mother. She was asking about your work schedule and saying there was a family emergency. When I told her I couldn't share that information, she became quite upset and started telling me about some family conflict. I wanted to check in with you about this. My stomach dropped. Linda, I'm so sorry. She's been escalating her behavior since I set some boundaries with my family. I had hoped it wouldn't affect my work. Actually, I'm calling because what she told me didn't match the Jessica I know at all. She painted you as irresponsible and vindictive, but you're one of our most reliable employees. It made me wonder what the real story was. I gave Linda a brief professional summary of the situation, the financial exploitation, the Thanksgiving text, the systematic disconnection, and the false police report. I kept it factual and unemotional, but I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I mentioned the $11,000 annual support I'd been providing. Jessica, I had no idea you were dealing with this. And frankly, after hearing your side, your mother's call makes a lot more sense. She was trying to use me to get information about you. I'm sorry she involved my workplace. That was completely inappropriate. Don't apologize. You handled a difficult situation with remarkable professionalism. But I want you to know that HR is aware of the situation now, and we have protocols in place if she tries to contact you here again. That evening, I got a text from my cousin Riley, Dad's nephew, who I hadn't spoken to since last Christmas. Hey, Jess? Saw the Facebook drama. Mom showed me the post and asked what I thought. I told her Aunt Margaret always seemed to treat you different than Ryan, and maybe she should mind her own business. Anyway, wanted you to know not everyone is buying. Her victim act. The text opened a floodgate. Over the next few days, I heard from people I'd forgotten were even connected to our family drama. Former neighbors who remembered the shouting matches through thin walls. High school friends who recalled me always having to leave social events early for family obligations. Even Mrs. Patterson, my old AP English teacher, reached out after seeing the Facebook post. Jessica, I saw your mother's post being shared around, and I felt compelled to reach out. I remember you as one of my most thoughtful students, but I also remember you seeming very stressed about family expectations. I hope you're taking care of yourself. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Ryan. He showed up at my apartment complex on Thursday evening, waiting by my car when I got home from work. He looked terrible, thinner than usual, his normally perfect hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. We need to talk, he said without preamble. I considered telling him to leave, but something in his demeanor was different. This wasn't the entitled golden child I was used to dealing with. This was someone who looked genuinely shaken. You have 10 minutes, I said, unlocking my apartment door. He followed me inside and immediately started pacing. Jess, What the hell is going on? Mom is losing her mind, Dad won't talk to anyone, and I just found out you were paying for everything? What do you mean you just found out? I mean, I had to get my own car insurance last week, and when the agent asked about my previous coverage, I found out you'd been paying for it. Then my phone got cut off and I had to set up my own plan, and the sales guy mentioned I'd been on a family plan that was being canceled. Then Dad mentioned something about you covering his overdraft fees, and Mom let slip that you'd been helping with rent. He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. How much money were you giving them? I pulled out my phone and showed him the spreadsheet I'd created. His face went pale as he scrolled through the numbers. Jesus Christ, Jess. This is almost $11,000 a year. That's just the regular stuff. Emergency expenses were extra, and they never told me. They let me think their phones and insurance and everything just worked, like magic. He sat down heavily on my couch. I knew they asked you for money sometimes, but I thought it was like $100 here and there. Ryan, did you know about the Thanksgiving text? He nodded miserably. Mom showed it to me after she sent it. She was laughing about it, said it would put you in your place. I told her it was cruel, but she said you needed to learn that family doesn't revolve around you. And what do you think now? I think she's insane. I think they both are. He ran his hands through his hair. Jess, I've been getting their bills forwarded to my apartment since you cut everything off. Do you know how much Dad's prescription medications cost without insurance assistance? Do you know how much it costs to get a phone plan when your credit is shot? That's not my problem anymore. I know, and honestly, good for you. I never realized how much you were doing, how much you were sacrificing. He looked up at me with something I'd never seen from him before. Respect. I would have cracked years ago. Why are you telling me this? Because Mom's Facebook post is bullshit and people should know it. She's playing the victim when you're the one who got victimized for years. He pulled out his phone. I want to set the record straight. Ryan, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I've been the golden child in this family my entire life, and I never questioned why that meant you had to be the scapegoat. I was complicit in your mistreatment because it benefited. That evening, Ryan posted his own Facebook message. I need to address my mom's recent post about my sister Jessica. The truth is, Jess has been financially supporting our parents for years, to the tune of thousands of dollars annually. She paid for their phones, insurance, medical bills, and countless emergencies while also dealing with constant criticism and emotional manipulation. The cruel silence my mom is talking about came after she sent Jess a text uninviting her from Thanksgiving and telling her she would ruin it for everyone. Jess finally set boundaries with people who were exploiting her generosity, and now they're mad that their ATM shut down. My sister is one of the most generous, responsible people I know, and she deserves better than the treatment she's received from this family. I'm ashamed it took me this long to speak up. The post went viral within hours. It was shared over 200 times and received hundreds of comments, mostly expressing shock at the revelation and support for my decision to protect myself. Mom's original post was quietly deleted the next day, but screenshots lived forever. Several family members who had initially supported her public plea reached out to apologize. Aunt Carol, who had always been Mom's closest ally, sent me a long email expressing regret for not seeing the situation clearly. But the most meaningful response came from complete strangers. People who had seen Ryan's post began sharing their own stories of family financial abuse and emotional manipulation. I received dozens of private messages from people thanking me for showing them it was okay to say no, and giving them permission to protect themselves. One message particularly stood out, from a woman named Sarah in Oregon. Your brother's post showed up in my feed because a mutual friend shared it. I've been supporting my parents financially for 8 years while they constantly criticize me and compare me to my siblings. I never had words for what was happening to me until I read about your situation. You helped me realize I'm not selfish for wanting to stop. I'm not ungrateful for needing boundaries. Thank you for being brave enough to walk away. It gave me permission to do the same. That weekend, I sat in my quiet apartment, reading through messages from strangers who saw their own experiences reflected in my story. For years, I'd felt isolated and crazy, convinced that my perceptions were wrong, and my family's treatment was somehow normal. But the outpouring of support revealed something profound. I wasn't alone. There were thousands of people out there who had been designated as family ATMs, emotional dumping grounds, and convenient scapegoats. My decision to break free had given others permission to examine their own toxic family dynamics. The Sullivan family drama had become something bigger than just our dysfunctional relationships. It had become a catalyst for conversations about family boundaries, financial exploitation, and the courage required to prioritize your own well-being over dysfunctional family loyalty. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying that burden alone. The weeks following Ryan's public revelation brought something I hadn't experienced since childhood: genuine peace. Not the fragile, temporary quiet that came between family crises, but deep, sustainable tranquility that came from knowing my phone wouldn't ring with someone else's emergency that somehow became my responsibility. For the first time in years, I slept through the night consistently. No 2 a.m. calls about Dad's chest pains that turned out to be heartburn. No frantic texts about overdue bills that needed immediate attention. No guilt-induced insomnia about whether I was doing enough, giving enough, being enough for people who would never be satisfied. But peace, I discovered, required intentional construction. It wasn't enough to remove the toxic elements from my life. I needed to actively build something healthier in their place. The first step was financial. With nearly $11,000 annually no longer flowing to Sullivan family expenses, I had resources I'd forgotten existed. I opened a high-yield savings account and set up automatic transfers. Within 2 months, I had more money saved than I'd had in the previous 5 years combined. But more than the practical benefits, there was psychological freedom in watching my bank account grow instead of constantly drain. Every dollar that stayed in my account instead of covering someone else's poor decisions felt like a small victory over years of financial manipulation. I also invested in things I'd been denying myself. A new mattress to replace the 10-year-old, one I'd been sleeping on because it still worked fine. A gym membership at a nice facility instead of the budget option I'd settled for to save money for their emergencies. Quality groceries instead of generic brands because I was allocating my food budget to cover their meal deliveries. The difference in my daily life was remarkable. I woke up rested, worked out consistently, ate better, and had energy for activities I'd abandoned years ago. I'd forgotten what it felt like to live without the constant background stress of financial insecurity caused by supporting other adults. But the most significant change was social. For years, I'd declined invitations, canceled plans, and avoided commitments because family emergencies always took priority. I was the friend who said maybe to everything, because I never knew when I'd be summoned to solve someone else's crisis. Maria was the first to notice the difference when I actually showed up to her birthday dinner, on time, without checking. My phone every 5 minutes, fully present for the first time in years. "You seem lighter," she observed over dessert. "Like a weight has been lifted." "An $11,000 weight," I replied, and we both laughed. But it wasn't just about money. I'd also shed the emotional weight of constantly monitoring other people's moods, anticipating their needs, and managing their reactions. I'd spent so much energy trying to keep the Sullivan family stable that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without hypervigilance. My coworker David invited me to join a weekend hiking group he was part of. Before the family disconnection, I would have automatically declined, knowing that weekends were prime time for Sullivan family emergencies. But now, I said yes without hesitation. The hiking group became a revelation. 8 people who got together every Saturday morning to explore trails around Cleveland, then grabbed lunch afterward. They talked about books, travel, career goals, and weekend projects. Normal conversations about normal adult concerns. No one asked me to solve their problems. No one criticized my life choices. No one compared me unfavorably to their siblings. They just accepted me as Jessica, the marketing professional who liked moderate trails and always brought excellent trail mix. For the first time in my adult life, I experienced friendship without the undercurrent of obligation or judgment. These people liked spending time with me not because I was useful to them, but because I was enjoyable company. The concept was so foreign it took weeks to fully absorb. Dr. Chen was fascinated by my adjustment to healthy relationships during our sessions. "How does it feel to have friends who don't need anything from you?" she asked. Honestly? At first it felt suspicious. I kept waiting for the catch, for them to reveal what they actually wanted from me. But gradually I realized that what they wanted was just friendship, mutual enjoyment of each other's company. And how does that compare to your family relationships? There is no comparison. My family relationships were entirely transactional. They showed interest in me only when they needed something. These friendships are based on genuine mutual affection and respect. The contrast became even more apparent when I started dating again. I'd been single for 3 years, partly because potential partners sensed the chaos surrounding my family obligations, and partly because I'd internalized the message that I wasn't worth prioritizing. Through the hiking group, I met James, a software engineer who was recently divorced and rebuilding his own life. Our first few dates were tentative on both sides. We were both recovering from toxic relationship dynamics and learning to trust our judgment again. What struck me most about dating James was how uncomplicated it felt. We made plans and kept them. We talked about our goals and interests. He never asked me for money, never created artificial emergencies, never made me feel guilty for having boundaries. When I told him about my family situation, his response was refreshingly straightforward. "That sounds exhausting. I'm glad you got out of that situation. No lectures about family loyalty. No suggestions that I should try harder or be more understanding. Just validation that my experience had been difficult and support for my decision to prioritize my well-being." 6 weeks into dating, James invited me to Thanksgiving dinner with his family. The invitation triggered immediate anxiety. Holidays had been battlegrounds for so long that I'd forgotten they could be enjoyable. "I understand if it's too soon," he said when he noticed my hesitation. "But my family is pretty low-key. My mom makes amazing stuffing. My dad tells terrible jokes, and my sister will probably corner you with questions about marketing because she's starting her own business. No drama, no expectations, just good food and easy conversation." I accepted, and it was a revelation. James's family treated me like a welcome guest, not an inconvenience they had to tolerate. His mother asked about my work with genuine interest. His father's jokes actually were terrible, but in an endearing way that made everyone laugh. His sister did indeed want marketing advice, but she asked respectfully and thanked me profusely for my suggestions. No one criticized my appearance, compared me to anyone else, or made passive-aggressive comments about my life choices. When I offered to help with dishes, they accepted graciously but didn't expect me to clean up after everyone. When the conversation turned to family stories, they included me naturally, instead of making me feel like an outsider observing their private dynamics. Driving home that evening, I cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization of what I'd been missing. This was what family gatherings could feel like when they weren't weaponized for control and manipulation. This was what love looked like when it wasn't conditional on usefulness. I started a gratitude journal that week, writing down 3 things I appreciated about my new life each day. The entries revealed patterns I hadn't consciously noticed. Grateful that I can make weekend plans without worrying about emergency calls. Grateful for friends who listen to my problems without immediately making them about themselves. Grateful for a bank account that reflects my actual income instead of my family's expenses. Grateful for sleep that isn't interrupted by manufactured crises. Grateful for dating someone who doesn't see me as a resource to be exploited, but the most significant development was professional. Without the constant distraction of family drama, my work performance improved dramatically. I completed projects ahead of schedule, took on additional responsibilities, and finally felt confident enough to apply for the senior marketing manager position that had been posted for months. The interview process was rigorous, but I was prepared, in ways I'd never been before. My mind was clear, my stress levels were manageable, and I could articulate my accomplishments without the background noise of family criticism undermining my confidence. I got the promotion, along with a $15,000 salary increase. The additional income meant I could accelerate my savings goals, plan a vacation to Europe I'd been dreaming about for years, and maybe even start looking at buying a house. But beyond the practical benefits, the promotion represented something deeper, proof that I was capable of significant achievement when I wasn't carrying the weight of other people's dysfunction. For years, I'd accepted their narrative that I was mediocre, that I lacked ambition, that I wasn't achieving my potential. The truth was that I'd been achieving someone else's potential while sacrificing my own. I'd been so busy solving their problems that I hadn't had the energy or focus to pursue my own goals. As winter turned to spring, I realized I was living a completely different life than I'd had 12 months earlier. Same apartment, same city, same job title at the time, but everything meaningful had changed. I had friends who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. I had a romantic relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I had financial security instead of constant anxiety about money. I had career momentum instead of stagnation caused by divided attention. Most importantly, I had a sense of self that wasn't dependent on other people's approval or disapproval. I knew who I was, what I wanted, and what I would and wouldn't accept. In my relationships, the Sullivan family had spent years convincing me that I was selfish, ungrateful, and inadequate. But building a life free from their influence had revealed the truth. I was generous, responsible, and capable of creating exactly the kind of life I wanted to live. I just had to stop letting them destroy it first. 11 months after the don't show up for Thanksgiving text, I was living a life I barely recognized as my own. It was October again, and instead of dreading the approaching holiday season, I was planning a weekend trip to Vermont with James to see the fall foliage. We'd been talking about spending Thanksgiving with his extended family in Chicago. His grandmother's famous apple pie was apparently worth the flight. I was organizing my travel documents when my phone rang. Unknown number, Cleveland area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Jessica. The voice was small, uncertain. It took me a moment to recognize it. Ryan? Yeah. I got a new phone. New number. I was hoping we could talk. We hadn't spoken since his Facebook post defending me 10 months earlier. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd been struggling since taking on the burden of our parents' needs, but I'd resisted the urge to reach out. My boundaries were firm. I would not be pulled back into the Sullivan family dysfunction, not even to rescue the golden child who was finally experiencing what I'd dealt with for years. What's going on, Ryan? It's Mom. She's really not doing well, physically or mentally. Dad can't handle her alone anymore, and I'm drowning trying to help them both while working full-time. I know I have no right to ask, but I was wondering if maybe we could meet for coffee. just to talk. The old me would have immediately said yes, would have dropped everything to rush to their aid. The new me paused, considering not what they needed, but what I was willing to give. "I can meet you for coffee," I said finally. "But I want to be clear up front that I'm not available to resume any caregiving role. This is just a conversation." "I understand. Thank you, Jess. Really." We met the next evening at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. Ryan looked exhausted in a way that was painfully familiar. The bone-deep weariness that comes from being someone else's entire support system. He'd lost weight, his usually pristine appearance was disheveled, and there were stress lines around his eyes that aged him beyond his 25 years. "You look tired," I said as we sat down with our drinks. He laughed bitterly. "I haven't slept through the night in 6 months. Mom calls at all hours with panic attacks. Dad can't remember to take his medications without constant reminding, and I'm basically running 2 households while trying to keep my job." "That sounds familiar." "I know, and I'm not asking you to. Come back and fix it. I needed to talk to someone who would understand what this feels like." He told me about the past year from his perspective. After I'd disconnected from the family systems, the full weight of their needs had fallen on him. Dad's health had deteriorated faster than anyone expected. Early-stage dementia that was progressing more rapidly than typical. Mom had developed severe anxiety and depression, possibly in response to losing her primary source of control and financial support. "The money stuff was the first wake-up call," Ryan said. "I had no idea how much their lifestyle cost. Their rent alone is more than my mortgage. Add in utilities, groceries, medical expenses, and the random emergencies that seem to happen weekly, and I'm burning through my savings faster than I can replenish them." "How much are you spending on them monthly?" "Around $1,300, sometimes more. And that's just the basics. Last month, Dad fell and needed to go to the ER, and even with Medicare, the co-pays and follow-up appointments cost me $800. I did quick math in my head. Ryan was spending more than I had been, probably because he hadn't set up the systematic efficiencies I'd developed over years of managing their needs. "But it's not just the money," he continued. "It's the emotional stuff. Mom calls me crying, at least 3 times a week, usually about some imagined crisis or her anxiety about Dad's condition. She wants me to come over every weekend to help with household tasks, but then she criticizes everything I do. Nothing is ever right, nothing is ever enough." "And Dad?" "Dad is fading. Some days he's completely lucid and aware, other days he doesn't remember my name. The doctors say it's going to get worse, and Mom can't handle the reality of that. She keeps insisting he's just having bad days, and will get better if we all just try harder." Ryan looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen from him before. Genuine vulnerability mixed with desperate exhaustion. "I don't know how you did this for so long, Jess. I really don't. I've been dealing with it for less than a year, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. I did it because I didn't know I had a choice. You do know you have a choice." "Do I? They're my parents. Dad is sick. Mom can't cope. If I don't help them, who will? Professional caregivers, social services, adult protective services if necessary. There are systems in place for exactly this situation, Ryan. You don't have to destroy yourself to keep them comfortable." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. "Mom keeps asking when you're coming back. She's convinced that if she just apologizes the right way, or if I explain how much they need you, you'll come home and everything will go back to normal." There is no going back, Ryan. Even if I wanted to, which I don't, I'm not the same person who used to absorb their dysfunction. I've built a life that doesn't have room for their chaos. "I know, and honestly, I'm glad you got out, but I need advice on how to survive this without completely losing myself." We talked for 2 hours. I shared some practical strategies, setting specific days and times for family assistance. Rather than being on call 24/7, establishing monthly budgets for their support instead of covering every emergency, involving professional services for things that were beyond the scope of family help. But more importantly, I talked to him about boundaries, about the difference between helping and enabling, about the importance of protecting his own mental health and financial future. You can't save them from the consequences of Dad's illness or Mom's inability to cope, I told him. But you can decide how much of yourself you're willing to sacrifice in the attempt. As we prepared to leave, Ryan asked the question I'd been expecting. Would you consider coming to see them? Just once? Mom's birthday is next month, and I think it might help her to see that you don't hate her. The request hung in the air between us. I could see the hope in his eyes, the desperate wish that somehow I could make his impossible situation easier. No, I said gently but firmly. I don't hate her, Ryan, but I also don't trust her. She's shown me who she is over the course of decades. One conversation isn't going to change that, and it would just give her false hope that she can manipulate me back into the family system. His face fell, but he nodded. I had to ask. I understand. But Ryan, you need to understand something too. I'm not the solution to their problems. I never was. I was just a convenient way for them to avoid facing reality. Now that I'm gone, they need to learn to manage their lives like other adults, or accept professional help. Your job isn't to replace me. It's to decide what level of support you can sustainably provide without destroying your own life. That night, I went home and told James about the conversation. We were curled up on our couch, the same one I'd bought after getting rid of the furniture that held memories of Mom's criticism. How do you feel about seeing Ryan like that? James asked. Sad for him, but not guilty. He's learning the same lesson I had to learn, that you can't love someone into being healthy, and you can't sacrifice yourself to fix other people's problems. Do you think he'll be able to set boundaries like you did? I don't know. He's been the golden child his whole life. He's not used to disappointing them or dealing with their anger. But maybe seeing what happened to me will give him a roadmap. James was quiet for a moment, then said, What if they try to contact you directly? It's been almost a year. They might make another attempt. Then I'll handle it the same way I've handled everything else, with clear boundaries and documentation. They taught me not to trust their words, so I'll judge them by their actions. 3 weeks later, that prediction came true in the most dramatic way possible. I was at work, reviewing budget projections for the next quarter, when Kelly from the front desk called. Jessica, there's a woman here who says she's your mother. She looks upset. She's asking to see you and says it's urgent. My stomach dropped. Margaret Sullivan was back, and this time she'd bypassed phone calls and gone straight to public confrontation at my workplace. Kelly, please tell her I'm unavailable and ask her to leave. If she refuses, call security immediately. She's saying something about a family emergency. She seems really distressed. Kelly, there is no emergency that requires my immediate attention. Please have her leave. But 5 minutes later, my direct line rang. Margaret had somehow gotten my work number. Jessica, please don't hang up. I know you're angry, but your father is in the hospital. He had a stroke this morning, and the doctors don't know if he's going to make it. I need you to come, please. The words hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything, Michael Sullivan was still my father, and the thought of him dying was devastating. But even in my shock, I recognized the manipulation tactics at play. Mom, I'm sorry to hear about Dad. What hospital is he at? Cleveland Clinic. He's in the ICU. Jessica, please come. I can't handle this alone. I'll call the hospital to get information about his condition, but I won't be coming to see you. What do you mean you won't come? He's your father. He could die? If Dad is dying, then I'll find an appropriate way to say goodbye that doesn't. involve subjecting myself to your manipulation. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up and immediately called Cleveland Clinic. After being transferred several times, I spoke to a nurse in the ICU who confirmed that Michael Sullivan had been admitted that morning with a minor stroke. His condition was stable, and he was expected to make a full recovery. A minor stroke. Stable condition. Full recovery expected. Margaret Sullivan had turned a manageable medical situation into a deathbed emergency, then used it to try to force me back into the family drama. Even in crisis, she couldn't resist the urge to manipulate and control. I sent a flower arrangement to Dad's room with a card that read, "Wishing you a speedy recovery. Take care of yourself. Jessica." Then I blocked the hospital room phone number before Mom could use it to continue her emotional assault. That evening, Ryan called from his new number. "Jess, did Mom call you about Dad?" "She did. How is he really?" "He's fine. Frustrated and embarrassed, but fine. The stroke was minor. He has some weakness on his left side, but the doctors expect full recovery with physical therapy." Mom has been telling everyone he's dying. Of course she has. She's furious that you didn't come to the hospital. She's been calling you heartless and cruel to anyone who will listen. And what do you think, Ryan? There was a long pause. "I think you made the right call. She was absolutely using Dad's condition to try to manipulate you back into the family. When I pointed that out, she started screaming at me too." That conversation marked the final test of my boundaries. Margaret Sullivan had played her ultimate card, the potential death of my father, and I had still refused to be manipulated. I had found a way to express care and concern without compromising my well-being or feeding her need for drama and control. As I hung up the phone, I realized something profound had shifted. I was no longer afraid of their crises, their anger, or their attempts to make me feel guilty. I had passed the test that proved I could maintain my boundaries even in the most emotionally charged situations. The scared, desperate daughter who had absorbed their dysfunction for decades was truly gone. In her place stood a woman who could feel compassion without being controlled, who could care from a distance without being consumed. I was finally, completely free. 3 years after the hospital manipulation attempt, I stood in the conference room of a downtown Cleveland hotel, looking out at an audience of 47 people who had gathered for the first ever Breaking Free workshop, a day-long seminar I'd developed for adults recovering from family financial abuse and emotional manipulation. The idea had started small. After Ryan's Facebook post went viral, I'd received hundreds of messages from people sharing similar stories. What began as individual conversations evolved into an online support group, then a blog, and eventually this in-person workshop that was now booked solid with a waiting list. In the front row sat Sarah from Oregon, who had become my co-facilitator and closest collaborator. Next to her was Jennifer from Atlanta, who'd driven 12 hours to attend. Scattered throughout the room were faces I recognized from our monthly video calls. People who had found the courage to set boundaries with toxic family members and were now helping others do the same. But it was the new faces that moved me most. People in their 20s, 40s, 60s, all wearing the same expression I remembered from my own reflection 3 years ago. Exhausted, confused, desperate for validation that their experiences were real and their desire for freedom wasn't selfish. "My name is Jessica Sullivan," I began, my voice steady and confident in a way that would have amazed my former self. 3 years ago, I received a text message from my mother telling me not to show up for Thanksgiving because I would ruin it for everyone. Today, I want to tell you why that cruel message became the greatest gift I ever received. I told my story, not for sympathy, but as a roadmap. I walked them through the financial exploitation, the emotional manipulation, the systematic gaslighting. That had convinced me I was the problem. I shared the moment of clarity when I realized I had a choice. the strategic disconnection process, and the aftermath that included police reports, public shaming, and eventually, vindication. But more importantly, I talked about what came after, the peace that followed the chaos, the relationships I'd built based on mutual respect rather than obligation, the career advancement that came when I wasn't constantly distracted by manufactured crises, the romantic relationship that flourished when I wasn't too drained by family, drama to invest in my own happiness. The hardest part, I told the audience, wasn't cutting off the financial support or changing the locks on my apartment. The hardest part was accepting that I deserved better than what I'd been accepting. The hardest part was believing that my needs mattered as much as theirs. During the lunch break, a woman in her 50s approached me with tears in her eyes. Her name was Carol, and she'd been supporting her adult son and his family for 15 years while enduring constant criticism and demands for more help. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered. "I thought I was crazy for feeling trapped by people who are supposed to love me." "You're not crazy, and you're not alone," I told her. "And you're not trapped. You have more power than you realize." The afternoon session focused on practical strategies. Sarah led a financial planning workshop, showing attendees how to calculate the true cost of their family support and create budgets that prioritized their own financial security. A local attorney explained the legal aspects of removing yourself from co-signed accounts and shared financial obligations. Dr. Chen, who had graciously agreed to speak at the event, addressed the psychological aspects of boundary setting and the grief that comes with accepting that some relationships can't be saved. "You may need to mourn the family you wish you had," she told the group, "before you can fully embrace the life you're building." But the most powerful moment came during the final session, when we opened the floor for attendees to share their own experiences. One by one, people stood up and told stories that were heartbreakingly familiar. Parents who drained their savings, siblings who exploited their generosity, extended family members who weaponized guilt to maintain control. A young man named Marcus shared that he'd been paying his parents' mortgage for 6 years while living in a studio apartment because they'd convinced him that he owed them for his college education, an education they'd actually forced him to take loans for. Woman named Patricia talked about supporting her sister's family of 5 while being excluded from family gatherings because she was too stressed and brought down the mood. An older gentleman named Robert described how his adult children had moved back into his home temporarily 8 years ago, and now treated him like a live-in servant while spending the money he gave them on luxury items. Each story was met with nods of recognition and murmurs of support. These people had spent years thinking they were alone in their experiences, that their family dynamics were uniquely dysfunctional. Hearing that their stories weren't isolated incidents was both validating and empowering. As the workshop ended, I handed out resource packets that included financial planning templates, legal referrals, therapist recommendations, and most importantly, contact information for our ongoing support network. "This isn't the end of your journey," I told them. "This is the beginning. You're not just changing your own lives. You're breaking generational patterns that have probably existed in your families for decades. That takes courage, and it takes support. We're here for each other." After the attendees left, Sarah and I sat in the empty conference room, exhausted but exhilarated. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't gotten that text?" she asked. "I'd probably still be there," I said without hesitation. Still paying their bills, still absorbing their dysfunction, still convincing myself that this was what family was supposed to look like. That text forced me to confront a reality I'd been avoiding for years. And now look what you've built from that experience. I looked around the room where we'd just helped 47 people begin their own journeys toward freedom. On the registration table were business cards for the consulting service I'd started, helping other people navigate the practical aspects of financial disconnection from toxic family members. Next to them were flyers for the book I was writing, a comprehensive guide to recognizing and escaping family financial abuse. But the most meaningful item was a folder full of thank you letters from people who'd attended previous workshops or participated in our online support groups. Stories of people who'd paid off debt after stopping their family subsidies. People who'd started new relationships or strengthened existing ones after setting boundaries. People who'd pursued career opportunities they'd previously thought impossible. One letter particularly stood out from a woman named Michelle who'd attended our first workshop 6 months earlier. Jessica, I wanted you to know that I finally did it. I told my parents I wouldn't be covering their rent anymore, and I removed myself from their credit cards. They reacted exactly like you said they would. Anger, guilt-tripping, accusations of selfishness. But I held firm. It's been 3 months now, and they figured out how to manage their expenses without my help. More importantly, I've started sleeping through the night again. I'm dating someone wonderful who actually appreciates my kindness instead of exploiting it. I got a promotion at work because I'm not constantly distracted by family crises. My life is completely different, and it's all because you showed me that it was possible to choose myself. Thank you for giving me permission to be happy. Reading. Letters like Michelle's reminded me why this work mattered. Every person who found the courage to set boundaries with toxic family members wasn't just saving themselves, they were preventing the dysfunction from being passed down to the next generation. They were modeling healthy relationships for their children, showing that love doesn't require self-sacrifice and that respect is non-negotiable. As Sarah and I packed up the workshop materials, my phone buzzed with a text from James. How did it go? Dinner's in the oven whenever you get home. I smiled, thinking about the life I'd built in the 3 years since I'd last spoken to my parents. James and I had gotten engaged 6 months earlier, and we were planning a small wedding surrounded by our chosen family, friends who supported our relationship instead of trying to sabotage it, people who celebrated our happiness instead of competing with it. Ryan and I talked occasionally, usually when he needed advice about managing our parents' expectations without destroying his own life. He'd finally learned to set boundaries, though it had taken him longer than it took me. Dad was stable in his assisted living facility, and Mom had eventually found a therapist who helped her understand that her children weren't responsible for her emotional well-being. They were both healthier now than they'd been during the years when I was enabling their dysfunction. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is refuse to participate in their self-destructive patterns. As we walked to our cars, Sarah asked the question that had been on both our minds all day. You think your parents know about the workshop? About what you're doing now? I'm sure they've heard something. Cleveland isn't that big, and this got some media attention. But it doesn't matter what they think about it. This isn't about them anymore. It's about the people we can help, the cycles we can break, the lives we can change. I got in my car and drove home through the city where I'd grown up, past the neighborhood where I'd spent my childhood walking on eggshells around people who should have been my safe space. I thought about the scared, exhausted woman I'd been 3 years ago, desperate for approval from people who were incapable of giving it. That woman had received a cruel text message that shattered the illusion that she was valued by her family. But that same message had also shattered the chains that kept her trapped in a cycle of exploitation and emotional abuse. The Sullivan family had told me I would ruin their Thanksgiving, and they'd been right in a way they never intended. My presence would have ruined their toxic system, their comfortable dysfunction, their ability to use me as an emotional dumping ground and financial safety net. But in ruining their old system, I'd given them the opportunity to build something healthier. And I'd given myself the gift of a life worth living. That evening, as James and I sat down to dinner in our peaceful home, I thought about the 47 people who had taken the first steps toward their own freedom that day. Tomorrow, they would wake up with the knowledge that they had choices, that their needs mattered, and that they deserved relationships based on love and respect rather than obligation and exploitation. 3 years ago, a cruel text message had ended one chapter of my life. Today, I was helping others write new chapters of their own. And that, I realized, was the true meaning of family. Not the people who shared your DNA and demanded your sacrifice, but the people who supported your growth and celebrated your happiness. The people who chose you and whom you chose in return. My name is Jessica Sullivan, and this is what it looks like when you finally choose yourself. 6 months after the Breaking Free workshop, on a crisp April morning, I was in my home office working on the final chapter of my book when the doorbell rang. James was at work, and I wasn't expecting any deliveries. Through the peephole, I saw a figure I hadn't laid eyes on in nearly 4 years. Margaret Sullivan stood on my doorstep, looking older and smaller than I remembered. Her once perfectly styled hair was gray and unkempt. Her clothes hung loose on a frame that had lost considerable weight, and her hands shook slightly as she clutched a manila envelope to her chest. My first instinct was to call the police. She was violating the boundaries I'd established, showing up unannounced at my home after years of no contact. But something in her posture, defeated rather than aggressive, made me pause. I opened the door but kept the security chain engaged, creating a gap of only a few inches. "Hello, Jessica," she said quietly, her voice lacking the sharp edge. I remembered. "I know you don't want to see me. I know I have no right to be here. But I need to give you something and then I'll leave. You could have mailed it." I tried to, 3 times. I kept losing my nerve. She held up the envelope. "This is something I should have given you years ago. Something I should have said years ago." Against my better judgment, curiosity won. I closed the door, removed the chain, and stepped onto the front porch, pulling the door shut behind me. I would listen, but I wouldn't invite her into the sanctuary I'd built. Margaret handed me the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were photocopies of financial documents, bank statements, receipts, handwritten calculations in her familiar, cramped script. "I documented everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every dollar you gave us over the years, every bill you paid, every emergency you covered, every subscription and service and debt you absorbed. It took me months to track it all down." I flipped through the pages, seeing my own financial history from her perspective. The numbers were staggering when compiled together. $47,000 over 6 years. Almost $50,000 that I'd given to people who had consistently told me I wasn't generous enough, wasn't grateful enough, wasn't enough. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because I need you to know that I know. I need you to understand that I see what we did to you, what I did to you." Her voice cracked. "I stole from you, Jessica. Not just money. I stole years of your life, your peace of mind, your ability to trust your own perceptions. I convinced you that our problems were your responsibility, and I used your love against you in the cruelest possible way." I stared at the papers in my hands, documentation of the systematic financial abuse I'd endured. She had taken the time to calculate not just the direct payments, but the compound interest I could have earned, the investment opportunities I'd missed, the financial goals I'd postponed to keep them comfortable. "The stroke changed your father," she continued. "Not physically, he recovered well. But mentally, emotionally, it was like he woke up from a trance. He started asking questions about our finances, about how we'd been managing our lives. When I tried to deflect, he kept pushing. Eventually, I had to tell him the truth about how much you'd been supporting us." She paused, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "He was horrified, Jessica. Absolutely horrified. He said he never realized the extent of it, that he'd trusted me to handle our relationship with you and I'd betrayed that trust. He made me do this math, made me face what we'd taken from you." "Where is Dad now?" I asked, surprised to find I still cared about the answer. He's in a senior community about an hour from here. Nice place. Very comfortable. He's ashamed, Jessica. Too ashamed to face you himself, but he wanted you to know that he understands now what he was part of. He said to tell you that he's proud of you for getting away from us. The words hit harder than I expected. Michael Sullivan, the man who had spent my childhood calling me a burden, was proud of me for finally refusing to carry his burdens. And you? I asked. What do you want from this conversation? Margaret looked directly at me for the first time since arriving, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse, not the performative guilt she'd used to manipulate me in the past. I want to apologize, she said simply. Not because I think it will change anything between us, not because I expect forgiveness, but because you deserve to hear it. I was a terrible mother to you, Jessica. I treated you like a resource to be exploited rather than a daughter to be loved. I turned you into the family scapegoat because it was easier than dealing with my own issues. I used your kindness and your loyalty as weapons against you. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small jewelry box. This was my mother's engagement ring. I always planned to give it to you when you got engaged. But when I heard through Ryan that you were planning to marry James, I realized I had no right to be part of that milestone. I had no right to give you something that represents love and commitment when I'd spent years showing you neither. I took the box but didn't open it. Margaret, why are you really here? What do you want from me? I want you to know that you were right about everything. Every boundary you set, every limit you established, every dollar you stopped giving us. You were right. We had to learn how to be adults, how to manage our own lives, how to ask for help from appropriate sources instead of exploiting our daughter. She gestured to herself. I've been in therapy for 2 years now. Real therapy, not the fake counseling I used to claim I was getting when I wanted sympathy. I've been diagnosed with several things, anxiety disorders, depression, but also some personality traits that explain why I treated you the way I did. I'm working on it, but I know that work is for me, not to earn my way back into your life. Good, I said firmly, because you're not earning your way back into my life. I'm glad you're getting help. I'm glad Dad is somewhere safe and comfortable, and I'm glad you understand what you did to me. But understanding doesn't undo the damage. I know. I'm not here for forgiveness, Jessica. I'm here for closure. Yours and mine. We stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of nearly 30 years of dysfunction hanging between us. I thought about the scared little girl who had spent her childhood trying to earn love from a mother who was incapable of giving it. I thought about the exhausted young woman who had poured her resources into a bottomless pit of family need. I thought about the person I'd become once I finally walked away from all of it. You said I would ruin Thanksgiving for everyone, I said finally. Do you remember that text? She winced. I remember. It was cruel and untrue, and I sent it because I was angry that you were setting boundaries I didn't want to respect. You were right, though. I would have ruined your Thanksgiving. My presence would have disrupted your toxic system, forced you to confront the unsustainability of your lifestyle, made it impossible for you to continue using me as your family ATM. I would have ruined your comfortable dysfunction. Margaret nodded slowly. Yes, you would have. And we needed that disruption. We needed someone to stop enabling us long enough for us to face reality. I'm glad you found reality, I said. I'm glad you're both getting the help you actually need. I'm glad Ryan learned to set boundaries before he destroyed his marriage trying to manage your problems. But I want to be very clear about something. This conversation doesn't change anything between us. I'm not interested in rebuilding a relationship with you. I understand. Do you? Because in 6 months or a year, when the novelty of therapy wears off and you're feeling nostalgic or needy, You might convince yourself that this conversation was the beginning of reconciliation. It wasn't. This is goodbye, Margaret. Final goodbye. Her face crumpled, but she nodded. I understand, and I respect that. You've built a beautiful life without us, and you deserve to protect it. As she turned to leave, she paused at the edge of my porch. Jessica, for what it's worth, I am proud of you. I know I don't have the right to feel that way anymore, but I am. You became an incredible woman despite having me as a mother, and that's a testament to your strength, not my parenting. I watched her walk to her car, an older sedan I didn't recognize, probably something more practical than the luxury vehicles I'd helped finance years earlier. As she drove away, I realized I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no relief. Just emptiness where the mother-shaped wound used to be. That evening, I told James about the encounter over dinner. He listened without interruption, then asked the question I'd been avoiding all day. How do you feel about seeing her? Honestly, it felt like talking to a stranger, someone who happened to know intimate details about my childhood, but not someone who had any real connection to my life now. I pushed food around my plate, processing the day's events. She's not my mother anymore, James. She's just someone who used to have power over me. And the apology? Did it mean anything to you? It meant she's finally facing reality about what she did. That's good for her growth, but it doesn't change my past or my future. I didn't need her apology to heal. I already did that work without her. 2 weeks later, I received one final letter from Margaret Sullivan. It was brief, written in her careful handwriting on simple stationery. Jessica, I wanted you to know that I'm moving to Florida to be closer to my sister. I'm selling the house and will have no reason to return to Cleveland. I wanted to assure you that you'll never have to worry about unexpected visits or contact from me again. I've instructed Ryan not to share information about your life with me, and I've asked the family to respect your boundaries completely. You were right to protect yourself from us, and I'm grateful that you had the courage to do what I couldn't. Break the cycle. Be happy, Jessica. You've earned it. Margaret. I filed the letter away with the financial documents she'd given me, then called my publisher to schedule a meeting. The book was finished, and it was time to share the complete story, including this final confrontation, with the world. 6 months later, Breaking Free, A Guide to Escaping Family Financial Abuse, hit the bestseller list. The final chapter, titled When They Come Back, had become the most quoted section of the book. In it, I wrote, "Sometimes your abusers will eventually understand what they did to you. Sometimes they'll apologize, take responsibility, even make amends. This is not your cue to return to a relationship that was fundamentally broken. Acknowledgement of harm doesn't erase the harm. Recognition of abuse doesn't undo the abuse. An apology is not an invitation back into toxicity, no matter how sincerely it's offered. You are allowed to accept their growth while still protecting your peace. You are allowed to forgive from a distance. You are allowed to say, I'm glad you understand now, and goodbye." Margaret Sullivan had given me many things over the years: financial stress, emotional trauma, anxiety, self-doubt, and the deep conviction that I was fundamentally flawed. But in our final encounter, she gave me something different: closure. Not the closure that comes from reconciliation, but the closure that comes from complete clarity about who we were to each other and who we would never be again. The scared little girl, desperate for her mother's love, was finally, completely at peace. In her place stood a woman who knew exactly what love was supposed to look like, and it looked nothing like what the Sullivan family had offered. My name is Jessica Sullivan, and this is how you end a story that should never have been yours to carry in the first place. You choose yourself. You protect your peace. You build a life so beautiful that the people who tried to destroy you become irrelevant to your happiness, and you help others do the same. That's how generational cycles end. Not with forgiveness, not with reconciliation, but with the simple, revolutionary act of refusing to pass the damage along. That's how you win. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.